Welcome to New Home Insights, the podcast from John Burns Research Consulting. I'm your host, Dean Worley. If you want to follow market trends, demographics, capital, new ideas, and endeavors that touch on housing, we're going to try to make sense of that every couple of weeks. Let's go. Welcome to the New Home Insights podcast. I'm your host, Dean Worley. American real estate has long been viewed as kind of a safe harbor, especially by Japanese firms, which have recently been very active in the U.S. new home builder world. So today we're going to talk to David Viger. David is the president and CEO of Sekisui House U.S. Sekisui has recently been very active in the U.S. market and now has a number of American new home builders within its family of companies. We're going to talk about the approach that Sekisui sees and their attraction to the American real estate market. And we're going to end up with taking hopefully a pretty deep dive into something that has been really exciting. And I've seen it and I love it. It's their Shawwood brand, which is kind of this super high quality process way of building homes that's different than what's mostly done here in the United States. First, though, we're going to get to know David a little better. David, how are you doing?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad you can do it here. I've been wanting to have this for a while, since even before I toured your Shawwood in Folsom, probably 5 or 6 months ago. And again, we'll get to that at the end, but it's pretty eye-opening. So first, let's start with you though. And by that, so just give us a little rundown on your background. I definitely want to start with Navy and football and Naval and U.S. Naval Academy football.
Hey, I love to start there. Definitely a very impactful time in my life. And I think my journey to home building is an interesting one, and so it really did start. I grew up in San Diego, and had an opportunity to go to one of the academies. I played football in high school. Was a little undersized for your typical kind of big name D1 football schools, and so I took the alternate route and heard that Navy, you could play Notre Dame on TV every year, and said, hey, this is my chance to kind of show the world I got overlooked. And I told my parents I'm going to the U.S. Naval Academy, which I laugh with people because they were all big West Point fans. And so in an odd way, I became the rebel in the family.
Can you tell us how much did you weigh then?
Yeah, it was interesting because, in high school, I was always a pretty stout kid in sports and played all of them, and grew up in a generation where you didn't pick one. They all kind of helped, the other sports with all the different aspects. And so by my junior year, I probably was about 6'2", maybe 230, and looking like I could be a pretty good collegiate athlete, was talking to all the big colleges. And then I went through this growth spur and shot up to a little bit over 6'5", and suddenly went from 230 to about 190, and the phone stopped ringing, the responses stopped. Yeah. And so I suddenly became an undersized lineman for D1 football.
Nowadays, though, you'd have to be like 400, 350. I mean, it's just, so you'd be really undersized these days, wouldn't you?
Oh, it's unbelievable. I look at, college kids look like they should be in the pros. High school kids now resemble the kind of guys I played football against in college. I mean, it's just remarkable what nutrition and science has done to that sport.
Well, you were able to take the playing for the Navy, and you played pro ball.
Yeah, no, I lucked out. I tend to take the hardest route to everything I do in life. So in true form, went there to obviously serve the country, get a great education. My sights were not on anything but getting to, say and get to play on Saturdays and play some big Division I schools. And miraculously, I went through another growth spurt where I started to fill out a little bit. And you get some of that, college coaching and training tables. And by the time I was a senior, I was about 290, ran a 4.7 40, which was very fast for that size. Was a D lineman, and by the end of the season, I got offered to play in a couple college all-star bowl games, and eventually signed with Bill Parcells and Belichick with the New York Jets.
So when did you make that transition after football into home building? I think is Richmond American was you first, or did that come eventually?
No, Richmond was my first. So I graduated in 98, right around 2003. I'd gotten hurt, went back to where I had a house in Vegas, was rehabbing, trying to figure out, do I keep making a run at this? I'm also at this point, 29 years old. So it's not like a typical kid that just got out of, college looking for a job at 24, 25. And so I had to make a real life decision. Do I try to go back and waste another year getting into kind of the work environment? I knew I would never retire off of anything I ever made, kind of tooling around the NFL. And so I figured, hey, let me go and start to shop the market. And my father was an executive recruiter in the construction industry my whole life and always really pushed me towards, the national home builders. And so he set up some interviews. And I think I interviewed with about 9 publics. And at the time, as a lot of people in this industry know, Las Vegas was just absolutely blowing up if you look at the past size of Las Vegas. But then 2004 and 5 were just monster years in that market. And so there were plenty of publics, plenty of opportunities to go interview with. It's just the first 8 said no. And I can appreciate why they did. A lot like college scouts that are looking at undersized linemen. They were looking at people. Yeah, they were looking for people that could step in and actually help them, build, close houses, make money. Because at that point, you had plenty of customers. The operational side, you just were constantly trying to keep up with. And so taking a trainee or a long shot just didn't quite fit in any of their, models. And the last home builder was Richmond American. And after the first 8, I had my pitch down pretty tight. And it became less of an interview, more of a plea to give me a shot. And, I told them, don't look at my past. And, obviously they're great stories and great things to talk about through interviews, but that I had confidence in myself, wasn't afraid to, start at the lowest level job they had. If they could afford to give me one, felt like I had saved enough to kind of financially take a job like that. Just really wanted to learn home building. And so before I left the office, I had an offer to go be an assistant superintendent out on a job site.
And so you started with that kind of stuff. Have you taken those initial jobs? I mean, do you see your used lessons learned from those kinds of really on the line jobs to today as president and CEO of Sekisui House?
1,000%. And we kind of joked about my era of playing all the sports. I think sometimes in business, it gets overlooked, this idea of being the specialist, which is super important. And I took a different route of really understanding the whole gamut. And so there's sacrifice to that. But through my career with Richmond, I had worked in about every division they had, different roles, different disciplines, from construction to purchasing to land, to acquisitions, to doing a startup. So by the time I got my first division president's job, I can promise you along that route, there were many, many more talented individuals at everything I did, but I had a very good understanding of what it was like to be them, what it was like to give direction and how that would be best taken to help them be successful. And so having that understanding of all those different sides of the business was really a huge help to me.
Now, take us through. So when did so your Richmond American Homes, where were you at Richmond when the Sekisui transaction occurred?
So I think I was in my 3rd or 4th year as the COO of Richmond American Homes.
So yeah, you really did. So you think of CEOs as coming from one of the streams, right? The sales and marketing stream, the operations stream, finance stream, the land act stream. You were doing all of those things. So you're now COO at Richmond, and Sekisui comes knocking. When was that? What year was that again?
Yeah, just a couple of years ago.
They did some other American builders before that. In fact, let's transition. Let's talk about Sekisui. They have a long history, right, as a Japanese home builder. And let's start there with, Sekisui's kind of core principles that they brought over here to U.S. home building.
It's a really great question, and I think it's one that they're so proud of. They'll tell you it before you even ask, which I actually really respect and really was excited about when meeting them. That part of that company and what they stand for, and it's a company that was started in around 1960, and they've built well over 2 million, I think about 2.4 million homes across the world, and they're headquartered in Osaka, Japan. And so they didn't come to the U.S. without this incredible, deep understanding of home building in general. But I think obviously what ultimately I think, and you see this transition into the U.S. Real estate side, when you look at how limited growth is in a place like Japan, and then you look at the U.S., clearly when you have a product, when you have a business model that you really believe in, that you've been ultra successful in, you've got to find places to continue to expand it. And I think the way the U.S. market is set up is just a natural place, and really the driving reason why you see several Japanese companies that have all made big investments in the U.S.
Well, Sumitama, there's a lot of interest here. Sekisui has, tell me if I'm wrong, I've been known really for a lot of innovation in home building over the years. And again, we'll get to Shawwood here toward the end. But the culture, describe that if you can, the company culture and the sense of innovation, and maybe a little bit on the longer term time horizon than most American companies.
Sure. Again, great questions. Definitely different than what I had experienced in home building and at Richmond, but something very much welcome not only to all the employees here, but I think is a real welcomed asset to the industry. But when you look and research Sekisui House, and again, you've got to spend about 30 seconds with an executive and you'll know exactly where they stand. Their core value really starts with love of humanity. And when you think of that and you think about big companies and what they're driving, you rarely see someone step back and go, what are we really doing? And I think we all talk in the industry about the impact on people's lives, but they really take it a step further and try to drive a impact on people's life that really is a beautiful thing. And it really starts with that idea of having a true love for humanity, and then really followed up on the home building side that, they want to make home the happiest place in the world for anyone that buys a house that's branded as Sekisui House.
Tell me a couple of examples. I know when I saw you speak earlier, late last year, you mentioned visiting Japan and how they sort of demonstrate and illustrate very concretely the little things that they do differently that maybe some other folks aren't thinking of.
Yeah. And, one, I think they are absolutely stalwart in their push to really focus on, three major components on the home building side, all of them kind of engulfed in the idea of quality. And one is, the quality and the spec and materials that we, use to build houses, put in the homes. They really want to make sure that those materials are highly durable. The idea that they're solving a longer term issue that people have on durability and maintenance and things like that. The second thing is the quality of the design. They really focus on the design of the house. And when you think about making your home the happiest place in the world, they use things like light and use of windows, and where some businesses might see windows as, a way to shed cost or, a way that gets in, they're like open doors. So you get, heat and cold through there. And so there's all these reasons, but they look at what the psychological impact is on a person or a family when they have, sunlight in their homes, and the way the homes feel without any furniture. When you use those shadows, you use that light to create a beautiful place that you live before you even start to put your things in. And so that thoughtfulness in that side, thoughtfulness in the design and the livability of the home, we call it lifestyle solutions in the design that really, not only age with you, and the idea is that the home gets better with age, the house is able to age with you, but ways that make a home that might be smaller, live bigger. And,
yeah. Gosh,
and these things are just spectacular, pieces of what they do in that aspect.
That is perfect for right now, because we're definitely seeing a trend towards smaller homes and buyers being less concerned about things they can show off and more concerned about things that make their life just easier and more livable.
We really are. And we saw it coming out of the downturn. Everyone really pushed to smaller. But if you really think about that, outside of kind of getting rid of the formal dining room to create kind of a great room, houses got smaller, but bedrooms got smaller, areas got smaller. But what didn't really grow is the use of the square footage that you took away to make that house more livable. You think about storage options, you think about the things you don't think about when you're being sold, but when you're living in it, you go, I got to go and put the iron on the top shelf. I've got to get a step ladder to grab it. Things that we try to think of and really design the house around how people live, how it's functional, so that size constraint that make it more affordable for a buyer and more practical doesn't sacrifice the livability of having all the extra space that you also have to pay for.
Yeah, that's going to be key. I think that's going to be key for a while because I don't see that reversing anytime soon. Let's talk about Sekisui and their approach and their thought process. What is it that attracted Sekisui to the American market? If I heard you correctly earlier, a lot of that has to do with being able to grow here. There aren't any front ranges and things like that in Japan. Was that the only thing, or is there some other aspects that really said we want to go to and be part of U.S. home building?
I think from a business perspective, it's easy to connect those dots, but I think what's really important is their belief in the research, the things that they've developed, and that their absolute promise to deliver this, not just to Japan, but to everyone in the world that they feel like deserves to have this opportunity to live in a home that they feel safe in, live in a home that lives with them. And so when you look at, they have entered into Australia and Singapore, and they've gone to other markets. But when you look at the impact they can make on how, the home building market is and buyer experience and what's out there, they're very committed to more than just throwing up houses and making money. They're very committed to providing U.S. citizens and people that buy homes here a chance to have that choice and to take part in what they're really proud of. And quite frankly, they've completely figured it out over there.
Are you sourcing supply from the quote unquote normal channels that other American home builders would source the supply? Or is a lot of those materials coming from Japan? Or just
No, we're still, the idea is obviously from an efficiency perspective to be able to source things that are as close to you as possible. And we'll talk about it later. When you look at Shawwood, it's so specific and what they do is so special to Japan. When we build those houses, we have quite a bit of product that is shipped directly from Japan.
Walk us through real quick. So what is the footprint here for Sekisui, the family of builders and where those folks are besides Richmond American, there's Woodside, et cetera?
Yeah, so we were the last company that was acquired. Before us, Woodside was the original home builder that gave them kind of a regional feel, with Woodside being in Southern California, Northern California, Nevada, Arizona, Utah. Then they bought Chesmar and Holt. Holt, who has a very good market share in the Pacific Northwest and specifically Oregon, was another big addition to kind of what their footprint was. And then Chesmar did an incredible job growing that company to where they're in all of the places you want to be in Texas. So, they really hit the central side, including Austin, San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, the places you would expect.
Western third, but for Richmond, it became more of a national footprint, right?
It did. And I think some of the philosophy and some of the technology will bode really, really well in some of our Florida, divisions. Obviously, by acquiring us, you pick up, you kind of finish the smile. You get the Mid-Atlantic, you get Florida, you get, Nashville, Tennessee. And so when you look at all the markets they suddenly have assembled, they're really key markets. It's not that there aren't other markets that I think in the future that we're looking at and aspire to get into, but it picks up a big portion of where they need to be. And I think by buying a big public, it kind of rounded the corner on having 3 or 4 separate companies and being able to put everybody onto kind of one platform, which allows obvious, incredible efficiencies, reporting. Again, being in Osaka, being able to pull data that covers all of the companies, that everything is standardized. I think they had made such a commitment, not only at that point financially, but a commitment to the future, that was a key piece for them to put together earlier in this venture than to wait, farther down the road.
You said Richmond, the last piece. You don't have to answer this question. You can be as vague as you want to be, but does that mean you're probably going to grow more organically now, or might there still be some acquisitions in the future?
It's a fair question. And my answer, I think, is pretty fair in the sense that, I think those options are always on the table. I think they've shown the ability to understand what an acquisition can do for you, both positive along with, the negatives in any purchase of an asset. But I also think that we have an incredible ability now to also grow organically. The options in entering a new market, I think, are wide open because of what the other companies bring to the table and what we bring to the table. And then obviously Sekisui House Japan's appetite and familiarity with acquiring as well as organic growth.
What is the size of the operations now? Like, let's say lots that are owned or optioned or something. What is kind of, do you know what's your 26 or maybe what your delivery's expectation is for 26? I don't. Again,
I'm very used to not providing forward-looking information. What I will tell you,
I thought I'd ask.
What I will tell you is, I think in 24, we closed over 15,000 houses. It put us around the top 5 national home builders out there. So when you think about future growth, it would hard to not think that we're looking at growth projections that would match other national builders that kind of sit around our size currently.
Do you think about how you differentiate your brands? Is that something that's pretty critical, Richmond versus Woodside? Are you very conscious of, okay, this brand is going to do this. Not everyone's going to be omnivorous. We're going to try to niche them, or do you let them kind of do what they want to do?
I think in the future, you'll have a single brand.
Okay.
Recently, the MDC back office of U.S. home building is now Sekisui House U.S. And so we're one company from that perspective. Our divisions, are all part of that one company brand and name. Our subdivisions, for different reasons, will carry the brands of those builders until they're kind of somewhat replaced with some of the great product that we're bringing out, more Shawwood, things like that. So the idea is to daylight out the brands eventually, but they're also really well-built brands, in those markets. They've done incredibly well. And so there's not a rush to go out there and dampen what for a lot of people is a big part of who they buy from and the history of those companies. And so we don't want to run too far away from the great histories in all the builders that they've absorbed at this point.
Okay. So did I hear you right? There eventually, though, will be a single brand name at some point in the future?
There's a single brand name for the company, which is the Sekisui House U.S. But I think from a product perspective, we want to make sure that we're out building homes that align with the Sekisui House technology and some of the things that we've talked about. And I could see a world where maybe there's some brand differentials that come with product that really fits, what we're pushing to go put out there. But there's not necessarily a time and place where you'll see that. Shawwood, obviously is its own brand under Sekisui House. We want more of that. And so depending on how the brands grow, we'll probably ultimately develop into what our footprint of house brands are, even though the Sekisui House U.S. is now one company and will always be that going forward.
You're a big company, and your brands do have kind of naturally play in lots of different niches. Do you think of yourself as, in terms of like hitting the buyer types, you're going to always be hitting everywhere across entry level, first move up on up, and meet active adult? Do you see that as your future?
I think when you go back to the idea that we really want to be in a place where every homeowner has the choice to have some of the great things that we feel we'll be bringing to the market. It's hard to exclude a market share that's out there that wants to buy homes. At the same time, I think that some of the product, you walk the Shawwood that is currently built, will resonate to different demographics, and we understand that. But I think long term, we'd like to be in a place where anyone going out there shopping for home ownership has the choice to say, hey, I want a home that's built better, that fits my lifestyle, that has all of this technology put in, that really is something that I don't have to wait 5 years or 4 jobs later to have a chance to have a home. Because again, for us, we really want to provide that happiness, that safety, the stress-free side. And I don't think you can put a buyer demographic on that. I think we all want that.
Yeah. But do you start with that process, the thoughtfulness? Does that start with that buyer in mind, that segment in mind? Are you thinking, what does this buyer segment want? What are those things that have to do with the little things, the windows, whatever? Are you always thinking about the buyer? Is it buyer-centric, I guess?
I would say buyer-centric is the best way to describe how they approach this business. We are building a product that's for a customer, and that customer is human. And so every home and everything that we're focused on from now until who we ultimately round out to be will be with the idea of how does this impact the buyer at any stage of, homes that we're going to offer at.
How about that niche that you see a lot of for sale home builders have gone into in the last several years, build to rent? Do you have a take on build to rent and the future of build to rent for Sekisui?
I don't right now. They are definite entrepreneurs. The Sekisui House Japan, they've got all kinds of arms that deal with multifamily and everything else. I think for us in the U.S., for us to really match the expectations of Japan, it would be difficult to do that and to have ourselves scattered in too many different types of pieces of real estate.
Yeah, I'm probably getting too far ahead. I mean, like you said, it's only been a full.
No, they're great questions. I love it.
So I'm just wondering how about one more question along those lines, and then I want to talk about Shawwood is how do you view land banking? It's maybe a little bit different view for some of the builder folks than it was a few years ago. What's your take on that right now and in the next, near term?
I think if you look at, again, history, I think there were a lot of lessons learned coming out of, our big downturn, depending on what state you're in. Call it the start in 2006, you can call it 7, 8, 9. But I think what you saw were a lot of builders, almost every builder that said, hey, wait a minute, land can go down in value. It's still an essential part of what we do. And I think the land banking relationships with builders really solved an issue that really weighed down a lot of builders' opportunities during that time. I think from each perspective at each builder, they may have different rationales on why to do it, why not to do it. Currently, we're not engaged in any land banking deals. We had never done one with Richmond. I believe Sekisui House in the U.S. has never done one. We're not negative on it, but I think from our perspective, if we can continue to self-fund our operation, that's ideal. But I think also that with the expansion, it's getting hard not to figure out, vessels to be able to grow in time versus trying to catch up when markets start to speed up a little bit.
Yeah. One more question on Sekisui before we go over to Shawwood is that, traditionally you think of a lot of Japanese firms as having just very long time horizons. Do you guys what time horizons do you think of in Sekisui and how might that have been different from when you were at Richmond American?
Yeah, I think that was probably the biggest difference in learning about their company, experiencing the old MDC, Richmond American Homes. I think we were very much, 1 to 2 years. You never know what's going to happen in year 3 and kind of operated with that mindset. The thing that's really neat about Sekisui House is they understand the value from a return basis, not getting too far stretched on those kinds of things. But they're also a company that, they walked in and said, hey, we have a 50-year business plan for the U.S. Let's go through it. And I think that thoughtful planning is something that we've really appreciated as kind of a culture shift. Things won't always go as planned, but just their ability to have the patience and understanding of where they want to be in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. I think that for an employee with our company is pretty special.
Okay. And So they're going to adapt.
Well, like all home builders, I don't know that the milestone will change, but how we get there may change. I have not yet heard that, hey, you can adapt and change. It's just, no, you got to adapt and we're still going to get to where we want to be. And I think that's healthy for anyone that's managing a business. And, and so we laugh because having that transparency allows you to plan, allows you to be ready for those, 3-year, 5-year, 10 years, whatever it is that you got to aspire to go get done. But you also understand that, every year you have real bills to pay and people to make sure are being fed. And so you can't forget that you still have to live in the present and you still have to do the things that are best for a company in today's environment.
I think it's almost a given that management consultants or something like that would tell you that, long-term choices made with a long-term perspective are usually going to be better and sounder than those really short-term motivated choices. But it's unusual in the history of American home building.
It is, but if you go back to kind of their core of manufacturing homes and how important that process is, how important that product is, when you're really focused on a product, you look at it and say, hey, that really shouldn't have to change unless you find better ways. I think sometimes in real estate, we're looking at land and values and ups and downs. That can become a very herky-jerky type of management of the business and strategy. They just will not change on their strategy of how important the product is to the consumer.
So let's end ours with a little deep dive, I hope, into Shawa, because it is really fascinating. Let's start with for a lot of the listeners may not know what that is, not have heard of. Just give us a quick background on what is Shawa, where did it come from?
Well, if it makes anyone feel better, I remember the first time we went around and announced, we got Shawa questions. And at the time I was looking at our CEO going, what's Shawa? So it is okay if people have not heard of it. It's okay if they're unfamiliar with it. I had to do some quick research, but what I thought was fascinating is how many of our employees had heard of it in a product that's somewhat been more organic in its branding so far. And so I think, that alone really attracted me to, what is it about this product that has people in the industry searching it out, talking about it, which usually means someone's, found something pretty special. And I think the pillar of Shawood really goes all the way back to Japan. And, this is a market that, when you're building a house, you're very much thinking about, seismic issues, big earthquakes, typhoons, about anything that can topple your house over. Japan experiences it. And so through those years of building homes, obviously steel was a big part of construction in Japan. And to this day, there's still structures that they build with steel. And I think that's very appropriate. What they did was figure out a way to build a home that they could utilize the strength that you get from steel, but return back to something more organic. And that's really the pinnacle of where they came up with a framing aspect that really uses glue lams and special metal joints to assemble the home. And the precision in which they do it, the inspections and all these kinds of things really are special, because the strength of the glue lam to be able to get homeowners out there to say, hey, I'm comfortable not going with steel is pretty remarkable. And then the ability to design a home, even if it's smaller, allows spans and spaces that you really have a difficult time providing with conventional lumber. And so it gives us a real edge in designing even a smaller home to have floor to ceiling glass walls and doors and things that, because of the structure and the way that we build it, you're able to do those things and really provide special feeling houses regardless of size. And I think when you talk about quality and, safety, these things, again, they would never represent something off of a sales pitch of, what we love to say, we all are quality builders. I think the best example is if you go back to 2011, you had a catastrophic earthquake in Japan. And there's a picture, and if you say, a picture's worth 1,000 words, this was worth probably, the 2.4 million homes that they've built worth of words. But you see nothing but devastation, You don't even know that these were houses next to it. And then you see this one house standing completely intact, and it was a Sekisui House Shawood home, which really started to help everyone understand how much effort they put into designing a house that could withstand even one of the worst earthquakes that Japan has lived through. And even better, when you think about the company culture, again, when I talk about love of humanity, they're not buzzwords. They really are core values that we expect our employees to live with, our leaders to lead by. And Sekisui Japan absolutely embraces this idea. They went out as a company and contacted every single homeowner that had bought a Sekisui house in Japan. And not only did they call them, make sure they were safe, make sure they were okay, but they sent in masses people out to all of their homeowners, regardless of how long that house has been built, and provided water, provided opportunities to fix anything that was damaged during the storm. And these weren't things that were, hey, if you want to pay for this, we'll do this. This was them truly living by that core value of how important humans are and having love and respect for them. And what our houses do to protect them really is something that's much more than a tagline or just something that you throw around casually.
You've used the word thoughtful a few times. That's maybe the best illustration of thoughtful that you said so far is that personal touch after such a horrific disaster.
It's incredible. And the measurement for us in the U.S. provides us with lots of things to do better. But, I think when you've been with any company for 20 years, if you've been in an industry for 20, 30 years, it is exciting to have the measure that you thought you were close to really expanded above your expectations. And then the excitement to grow a U.S. home building company that I truly know will reach those measurements. It's something that we really look at as being something that will be a game changer in the U.S. home building industry.
So durability for sure. What are some other measures concretely that Shawood is going to perform or maybe outperform the typical wood frame U.S. home?
Well, I'll give you some of the other aspects. They use on the exterior a ceramic cast panels. We call it bell burn. And this stuff is incredibly impressive. It's dust resistant. It's scratch resistant. I mean, literally think of the desert markets. You don't have to repaint your home. You go out there with a hose and wash it off. And more importantly, with our presence in California, it has an incredible fire resistance to it. When you're in Japan and they have this massive R&D facility where they test these products and they work on the next generation of these types of things and how it impacts someone's ability to buy a home forever, if that's what they choose, they have a piece of this bell burn and they have a blowtorch and you got to hold it while they literally are lighting this thing up. I'm thinking, I am trusting their confidence in this, but you can't even feel. It doesn't even get warm. It's absolutely incredible. What's it? No, they weren't hazing, but I think they definitely had some fun with me, and that's okay. I got used to that in the Navy and football. I would have felt unwelcomed if they didn't mess with me a little bit.
Hold this. No. Trust us. We're going to go to blowtorch. You had again, you and I spoke together at an industry event a few months ago, and you had a really neat little story of when you went to Japan and they illustrated to you some of the ways they were very, very thoughtful. Do you remember that? Can you share that?
I do. I think the one thing that I wish we could talk about more, when I talk about the products, the durability side of the materials, the design, Japan has invested in an R&D facility that's just absolutely remarkable. And it's used daily, and it will be used forever. And I really think of that as a secret weapon because we don't have to go and invest in that side. Not only do they have years of investment on that side, but they're also performing things for the future. And that's something that, we get to take advantage of here. Part of that is kind of touring through the facility and some of the things that they really look at and they test. And so that when they build a home, they understand the lighting aspects and all these things that change the way that you walk a home and feel in a home. But also, like I said before, they're really building a home, whether you buy it and sell it in 5 years or 10 years. They want you to buy that home that day and say, I can live in this the rest of my life without having to make changes to the way my life changes as I continue to age there. And one of the great examples, they have these braces that they put on your legs. And again, I don't know if guinea pig's the right word. It's too small of an animal, but I was that person. And they have you sit on a toilet and they have a no hand bar, nothing. And they say, well, try to get up. And of course, I can't get up. So then they put this, they put the handrail in place and they have it at an angle. They say, well, now try to get up. Well, I could get up, but it was difficult. Then they kind of rotate it to an angle and now try to get up. And now you go, wow, I can get up. And they said, well, these braces represent, you might be in your 70s and that's how it's going to feel. Then they have me walk down steps, and then you look at where's the handrail, how's the placement, the thought process into those pieces, not just for the buyer the day they buy it, but knowing that they feel good that this house will live and age with that buyer is something that's, a key element to when they're really looking at producing product to the market.
And that R&D facility is in Japan, right? And they're testing.
It is.
Okay. And that's in Japan is a relatively older population. Are they thinking though about how the American buyer is different though, just to make sure they're hitting those hot buttons for those American folks as well?
They do. And I think there's a real pride in craftsmanship. There's a real pride in quality. But I think the great synergy between the two is, our understanding of the U.S. consumer and how those things are absolutely pieces that go into your final decision. But you also want a house that looks cool and feels cool and all the different kind of emotions and senses through your kind of lifespan that might attract you to a one home or the other. And I think we don't expect to give up any of that part of it. We expect our houses to feel fresh and to date with architecture and all those aspects. We want to make sure that, like I said, the house that maybe you're buying when you're 25, just because you can live there till you're 70, we understand you might be 25 or 26 and you want a home that feels great for you today. And I think those visual aspects are all very important as well.
Now, when is America going to embrace the bidet?
I will tell you, the more they get to use one, the faster they'll embrace it.
The Japanese baseball players who started to become, I assume this is true. I can't remember, I read it, but said that a lot of them came up with the first thing, they go to spring training facilities. And the first thing is like, where's the bidets? This is nuts. I need a bidet. So
you'll laugh. I remember the first time I went to Germany and I'm looking and I'm saying, wait, the taxi's picking me up in a car that most Americans aspire to buy on their own and say, I'm driving this really cool Mercedes and the taxi guy's picking me up in it. Well, you go to Japan and you land and you go to the airport, bathroom and you go, holy cow, the toilet's practically talking to me. It's lifted up. It's doing all kinds of fancy things. And, you go look online and what that would cost to put in my house. And I go, this feels like Germany all over again. Somehow I got to figure out how to get these things here the way they kind of mass produce and allow people those luxuries, which again, I think culturally, is going to feed into, our thought process on homes for buyers as well.
So Shawwood, though, is going to be considered a luxury product. You're looking for a significant price premium when all else is equal. Is that fair to say?
I think it is fair to say. I think the majority of our Shawwood subdivisions at this point probably tie with more of the luxury type buyer. But again, part of that is like anything, repetition, costs, how well we get at and efficient on getting the materials from Japan to here, or maybe even eventually built here. So the goal is not to keep it as just a luxury level home. Again, those aspects of it, when you go to Japan, it's not, you don't buy a Shawwood because you're in a price point. You buy a Shawwood because it's the home that you really want to own. And some of those great technologies in the home, in some ways, I would argue, feel better in a smaller home. And so, when we look at the life journey of Shawwood in the U.S., I think it's going to expand to more buyers than what we're currently attracting right now.
But how do you communicate that superior quality? And do you think there might be a little bit of a hurdle, or at least some time before American audiences realize, okay, these things are really different and they do add value?
Do. And I think any business that doesn't put the onus on them to prove that out is making a mistake. I think we can all agree that most consumers don't need any time to decide that that's what they're looking for. I think they're starving for it. And I think we're all very used to everyone representing that they're going to provide it for you. And so we know in providing that and really changing it for a consumer, it's got to be something that they emotionally feel, they visibly see, and something that we can back up with the correct research, inspection, reports, something that we can point to and tangibly say, do you get this next door? If this is important to you, here, it's yours when you close this home. I hope someday if you sell it, you pull this out and this is a selling point for the person that buys this home off of you, because we stand by what we're building. We're standing by the longevity of it and the things that we're doing that are extra outside of what a municipality or a code may ask you to do. We're doing things that we know are right and asking our employees to do these things so that we have that ability to provide that to our homeowners that walk in.
And I know you're in Temecula, which is a city in Southern California. You're also now in Folsom, a city in the Sacramento area in Northern California. I walked that. I saw you. So you do kind of communicate in that sales office environment, some cutaways. And this is how different the Shawwood is. And you go walk those models and it's remarkable. But I still feel like there's probably going to be that acceptance period where word starts to get out. This is really different than you might think it is.
I agree. And I think some of that comes with the expansion of the product. One of the things that we're really excited about is, we've got Shawwood open and available for people to not only walk, but buy in Washington. We have it available in Northern California, Southern California, Las Vegas, and Nevada. And so I think as you see those open in more states, not only do you have much more migration of consumers that might be moving from California where they saw it, now moving to, a Las Vegas where they find out they can have it. I think having these subdivisions open and getting the product out makes it easier for people to really understand. And it allows us to provide, continued, design and things that we think will continue to enhance the product as we grow it bigger.
That was my last question. You answered it. You segued perfectly. That last question is, where are you going next? I mean, do you see Shawwood as fairly soon a national brand?
I do. I think you'll see it really grow the quickest in kind of the West, whether it's Pacific Northwest or California. We've got really great assets. Like I said, in Las Vegas, we already have models open in Summerlin. We've got several land assets that are being developed or starting the process of building models. What's neat about it is you'll see the concentrated growth in markets that already are well established building it, but you'll see it start to kind of take over all of the markets through the next few years.
And I'm not just saying this because you're on the podcast right now, but I walk your models in Folsom, and you see little touches like light, natural light. There's a point I can't remember which planet it is, where you're in the kind of the middle of the second story and you have this little kind of glassed off office, and you're literally getting light from like 4 different areas in the middle of a large home. I didn't think that was possible.
It's huge. And when you think about, how humans react to light and sunshine and those things, that's what's driving those design aspects. And listen, every house right now, even if it's not Shawwood, is going through a pretty rigorous scoring system. And we're taking plans that are still conventional lumber and making alterations so that they at least meet a minimum threshold that incorporates some of these things right now, even if that house doesn't necessarily have kind of the Japanese technology throughout it, which we're also focused on continuing to get that out very quickly. And so I think you're going to see Shawwood grow. You're going to see the aspects that, are not inside the wall, but outside the wall start to grow faster in all the markets. And I think those aspects, ultimately to the consumer are well-deserved. And the sooner we can get some of these technologies and designs out, I think it's great for us and it's even better for the industry and future consumers out there.
That's awesome. I can't wait to see more. I love that one. I know I'm going to see more in Northern California. I'm looking forward to it. David, thank you for coming on. This has been exactly
I appreciate it.
As cool as I thought it would be.
Well, you're great. It was great meeting you in Northern California. And definitely, like I told you then, Appreciate the time to spend with you and would love to do it again sometime.
Awesome. I appreciate you coming on. This is Dean Worley for the New Home Insights podcast. We'll see you again in a couple of weeks.
Since you forgot to hit the stop button, I'm going to take a second to tell you about our weekly Building Market Intelligence newsletter. Over 40,000 smart folks get these timely takes on the housing market in their inbox every week, and you can too by heading to jbreg.com/subscribe and signing up.